Hello everyone, welcome back to Realis Historia, and for those who haven't watched the intro video for this channel, please I suggest you watch it so you can see what we're all about. Now this video is split into two videos. It is called A Tale of Three Dictators. It is about the similarities and one big surprising similarity between three dictators from three different centuries, the 19th, 20th, and 21st, and those dictators are Napoleon, Hitler, and Vladimir Putin. Now let's take a look at our dictator candidates. Now first up we have this unpleasant fellow, Vladimir Putin. Now he is dictator of Russia. He hides behind a sham democracy where oddly he's really the only major candidate there is, so who are you going to vote for? Well, if you don't want to go to prison, that is. Now, next we have this thoroughly terrible person, Adolf Hitler, basically dictator of Germany from about 1933 until 1945. I have personally lost family to this guy, mainly great uncles. So, yeah, and one uncle. Not a pleasant fellow. And lastly, we have this fellow, Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, he was basically dictator of France from 1803 to 1815 with a bit of a break in between. Now, he's steeped in a bit of romantic history, Napoleon, but I assure you he was a dictator just the same and quite destructive as well. Now, there are a number of things that make these guys very similar, their backgrounds, where they came from, and I guess their vision for what they wanted. But there's one particular thing that will surprise you that I'll deal with towards the end, which is the entire purpose of this video. Now, the first major similarity of these three fellows was that they all had a military background of some sort, and they had had something happen in their history that had given them a bit of an axe to grind. No, not that sort of axe. Stupid AI. Definitely not going to rule the world. They had this type of axe to grind. You know, motivation, a hidden agenda. Now, the first of our three candidates is Vladimir Putin, who is the current president / dictator / barbarian of the Russian Federation. Now, he had a career with the KGB. He rose to become a colonel. He was actually in the East German office in East Berlin when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Now, he considered the fall of the Berlin Wall and the destruction or dissolution of the Soviet Union as one of the worst geopolitical disasters of the 20th century. And since then, he has, apparently long sought to recreate that entity. Now, our candidate number two of the three dictators is Adolf Hitler. Now, he too had a military background. He was a corporal, rose to the rank of corporal in the army in World War I. And here he is here, circled in red, in 1915. Now, Hitler was really upset about how Germany was forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles when they weren't even invited to negotiations. Very upset how Germany was chopped up somewhat. And he sought to overturn the whole kit and caboodle and reverse what had happened to Germany. Now, our last candidate is Napoleon Bonaparte. Here he is here as a lieutenant in the French artillery, which he gained that rank just prior to the French Revolution of 1789. Now, he didn't enjoy fighting for kings or monarchs. He wanted to fight for France. And when the revolution took off, he very quickly joined the revolutionary side, and they fought against King Louis XVI's forces, who were eventually beaten during that French Revolution. And he sought to create an empire of the French. Now, the next major similarity that all three of these delightful fellows have is they do like a good old war to settle their or achieve their political goals. And I've chosen this image here because it's quite poignant. It is the war deaths from the Battle of Verdun, the war graves, from the Battle of Verdun in the Great War from February 1916 to around about December 1916. Over 305,000 soldiers were killed in this battle. Now, for me, there is no good war. There is a just war, and usually a just war is brought on by a bad tyrant. So we're going to begin with Vlad. Now, Vlad, he's actually had a few wars over his time. Right now, he's embroiled in a war in Ukraine, where, again, he's trying to reassemble the Soviet Union. Now, his favorite toy is the god of war, artillery. And he puts it to good effect with these classic military targets like blocks of units and civilian bridges and, well, civilians in general, really, because how do you win a war? A little bit of terror. That's how he goes about it anyway. Now, when he's finished with Ukraine, if he wins, which right now I think is unlikely, but if he wins, he may take it on the road, just like every other dictator before him who has got to this level of power has done. And, well, the sky's the limit after that. Now, let's take a quick tally on Putin's wars. Now, when he first came into power, he pursued the Second Chechen War to bring Chechnya into the fold after their independence after the First Chechen War. Now, during that war in total, civilians, Russians, and separatists, 185,000. Now, next after that, although concurrent with the Second Chechen War, was a short-lived Russo-Georgian War. Now, just simple, overwhelming superiority resulted in 1,000 deaths. Now, after this, from 2014 to 2022, Putin decided to take two huge bites out of Ukraine. And during this war, long-running war, there were 14,000 casualties. And finally, his piece de resistance, the full Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is still running now between 2022 and 2023. It's not finished yet. And so far, over 245,000 combined casualties. Now, this is an average estimate. It could actually be up to twice as much as this. Now, this brings us to an astonishing total of 445,000 war deaths in all the wars perpetrated by Vladimir Putin. And he's only just getting started. If he is let run, well, this guy has nuclear weapons. And this is the reason he simply has to lose before he goes too far. Now, Putin, well, he's a shadow at the moment to the next dictator who truly perfected the art of war and destruction and death, Adolf Hitler. You see, Adolf Hitler, well, he taught the lesson to Putin, taking little bites out of Europe, one at a time. Austria, Sudetenland, then Czechoslovakia as a whole, until he took one bite too much, just like Putin. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. And after a few days of demands to remove the German army from Poland, France and Great Britain then declared war. And 6 years of total war and destruction ensued. Now, an interesting little side note is, take a look at the other nation that also invaded Poland in September 1939. Soviet Union and their Great Patriotic War that they actually helped to start. And I'll be covering that in another episode later on. Now, Hitler's armies rampaged across Europe. Barely an inch of Europe was untouched, from Scandinavia in the north to the Balkans in the south, and from France all the way across to Hitler's fatal error in invading Russia. For 6 long years, carnage reigned across Europe. Cities burned, bombs fell, and millions of people died in the carnage. And also during this war, we were introduced to a terrifying word: genocide. Unfortunately, genocide did not stop with this war. However, eventually, with Hitler's suicide and the destruction of the Third Reich, Germany unconditionally surrendered and the guns fell silent on the 8th of May, 1945. The war in the Pacific did continue until Japan's surrender on the 15th of August, 1945. However, I've really always considered the Pacific War a different war to the war in Europe. And that's a good subject for another episode, which we'll deal with at a later date. Now, the cost of World War II was enormous, almost beyond comprehension. Cities lying in ruins, millions killed in concentration camps, tens of millions of soldiers and civilians were killed. Now, there's great debate about the final cost in human lives for World War II because of the nature of the war and the nature of the period of time. Accurate records were not kept. But for World War II, estimates range from anywhere from 60 to 100 million people perished because of a war started by this one dictator. Now, you might be wondering why I appear to be going backwards. Well, not appear, I am going backwards with the dictators, from Putin back to Hitler, and soon to do Napoleon. Now, the reason for that is I want you already know what's happening today, and you can surely see the similarities between Putin and Hitler already. But, we're not at the end stage of Hitler where tens of millions of lives could be at risk, and they could be. So I'm basically trying to present the possible end game, more of a indictment of what's happening today. Are we going to repeat history? Now, our last dictator candidate, Napoleon Bonaparte, from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. He had a penchant for war too. He was all about war. So from the very beginning, as his time as a dictator, his plan was to dominate and conquer the entirety of Europe, including Russia. And so he swept across Europe, south to Spain, northwest to Prussia and the German territories, Italy, and then, just as Hitler did, made the fatal mistake of invading the vast Russia. And in the wake of this war for the domination of Europe, nothing but devastation, fire, destruction, and the death of many, many soldiers and civilians. In fact, in the sense of casualties and the total scale of war, it was truly the first modern war, and actually in my own thinking, possibly the first real world war, and another episode topic there. Now, this map of casualties you see here, these are really estimates only, and the true civilian loss was never really accounted for because there was never really great particular attention paid to census details, so lost lives were not greatly recorded. Same with soldiers. But for the period of time, there was just no way to keep highly accurate records. So we come down to a figure of the Napoleonic Wars from 1807 to 1815. Somewhere between 3 million and 7 million people were killed. This was an unheard of figure prior to these wars. Truly a modern war. And it explains why for 55 years after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, there were no major wars in Europe. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. Part 2 is to follow, and it will deal with the one big similarity which will surprise some, not surprise others, and I don't believe is known about all three of them. So move on to part 2 to find out what I'm talking about. I'll see you there.